your attention, please. We'll start next up. Now, what's the invitation to talk now?
That's it.
I tried being nice. Genuinely, I'd just like to introduce Ajain. His talk is, actually, I'm going to let Ajain do his own introduction because I'm not capable. So, thanks very much, and I'd like to introduce you to Ajain Vivek.
Hey. Hey guys, you can hear me? Is that okay? Am I audible? Okay, perfect. Okay, I think I'll get started with the talk. Okay, I'll not waste time. And the talk is about syntactic sugar for Node.js application. So how many of you guys have been working on JavaScript for quite a while now? ES5? So let's say ES5, EcmaScript 5, ES6? Cool, that's cool. So if you are just trying to Google your answers in Stack Overflow or something, you end up having an answer which is written in ES5. Okay, and how do you transform all this to ES6? So ES6, well, I'll just go on with my next slide. ES6 is nothing but EcmaScript 2015. Okay, that is what officially it's called, but the alias ES6 seems to be more easy to. Okay, so what does ES6 give, by the way, right? So it just doesn't do something new. Okay, when I said ES5 or ES6, it doesn't mean anything new. It just adds a set of new set of features to ECMA 262 standards. So who do you know about what is ECMA? Or what does ECMA stand for? What do they do?
European Commission.
Yeah, okay, you're close, but okay, it's European Computer Manufacturing Association. And how is that close to JavaScript? That's a question, right? So they're nothing but, they're just giving a set of standards. They just don't do it for JavaScript. They do for all the other programming languages. They do for even your USB ports or anything, all the protocols, and everything is done by ECMA, okay? And so ECMA has written a set of standards which is driven by a community, and they've just added this onto your JavaScript. That's it, okay? And you have a compatibility guide, okay? So I think whenever you're referring to or you're trying to work on Node, the ES6 latest features, you could just go to Kanga X, okay? I think most of them would be aware of it. Did I load this up? Okay, so this is the compatibility guide, okay? And as you know, the JavaScript is actually born in browsers, right? The language of browsers it's known to be. And it's gone away and it's gone to Node, backend, everywhere the people started using JavaScript, right? So what is it doing, right? So you have NodeJS, and NodeJS is luckily built on Chromium, and you could use the latest features as much as possible. So if I want to go to see, I think Node 6, if you observe Node 6, the adoption rate is close to 95%, okay, 95 to more than that. So you could use all the latest features what you get out of an EcmaScript, okay. EcmaScript 2015 precisely. So what you see is the list of features what is being added here. Okay, I'll just go through a bit and also show you how do you transform your existing ES5 code to ES6. Just not copy paste the code from Stack Overflow and just use it, right? And how do you transform it and transform it wisely and where it is required. Okay, and let me go to my slide. Okay, perfect. So I think this was the wrong place. Okay, so adoption in Node.js, okay. How is ES6 being adopted in Node.js? If you are in Node 4, it's just 50% of your core, the features, I think 50% of the features are adopted in Node 4. Okay, you're trying to deploy in AWS and it just supports Node 4, then you have only 50% features. If you are in Node 5, you have 60% features which you could support. And if you're on Node 6, close to 90% or more than that, okay. So this is something good, so it's your choice to choose whichever environment and you could start using it, okay. So let me just jump on to the first thing, okay. So function defaults, okay. What is this, by the way? It's just actually giving, so let me just talk what is it. Default function parameters allow formal parameters to be initialized, and default values if no values are undefined is passed, okay. Might sound vague, but it's actually trying to give you default values. So to talk about an example here, okay, and the example is on ES5. How many of you guys have done this? Okay, I'll also, this is available if you could start looking at the code. If you have a machine now, you could go to tinyurl.com/sitjs, and this is a readme doc over there, okay? And you could start looking at the code and understand what it is. But let me go through the code. And so you are having a function called add, and you have two argument, that's x comma y. And what you do is, example, add 2 comma 3. What would happen here is you want to just have a count. What is the summed up number is 5, right? And in case if you are going to pass one argument, what happens is you need a default to fall back to, right? Else what would happen is it's going to give a 2 plus undefined, that is going to return your NaN, not a number. And if you're coming from a different background or a different programming languages like C or whether it's Java, what happens is if you pass the second argument is not passed in a function call, it's going to throw you error. But that's not the case with JavaScript, okay? And you should be aware of this. And this is how you have been doing all the time, just saying x or 0. X or some variable name or something, or whatever you call a string you want to replace with, right? And how do you transform this in ES6 now? And how is it easy, right? So it's very much simple now, okay? You just have to say x is equal to 0 on your argument itself, right? When you're giving a parameter, you say x is equal to 0, y is equal to 0, and no need to write all these bullshit. I think you have to go x or 0. You don't get to know what you're trying to do there, right? So now it's more simpler to read, and I think this solves a lot of problem. And hope you guys use it, okay? And next we'll go to REST parameters, okay? REST is something very interesting, okay? This has not been there in JavaScript, and I certainly love it, okay? So REST, actually what it gives you is a power of holding all the values to one shot, that is grouping to form a group of values, okay, which you could use. I'll just go to the code which makes more sense, okay? Let's take an example here, okay? You have a function called logger, okay? And what you're trying to do, if you see the method, when I've called the logger, I've passed an first argument as error, which is the type of the error, and that itself is an error. And the second argument is an object, which says what is the error. Error is going to be severity high, and you're going to pass a message saying, hey, cannot read the property. And the second error is also going to be of severity high, which is the third parameter. And you say message product is not defined, okay? What it does now is, in case there are multiple errors coming, you would need to, there can be n number of errors, right? What you would do in ES5 now is you would say, okay, I'll fetch the arguments. Okay, what you see now is the type is going to be arguments of 0. Okay, and I have a for loop which is running there, and what it does is it plugs all other elements except the first one. So I say var I is equal to 1, and I get all the values, I push it to the message, and I return type plus the messages. Do you think what would happen now? Is it going to return you is it going to throw you an error because I'm just doing type plus an array? So what, have you guys tried this out at any time? A string plus array? No, that's not the thing. So if you don't have an object inside an object, what it does here is it's string of what is array of strings, right? So it actually concatenates and it does a comma separated. So I'll just show you an example here. So this is running here. So you could go to this repository what I have, okay, and you could just traverse through this, and I'll just do that. Yep. Can you see this now? Perfect. Cool. So let me ls through this. So perfect. CD. It's okay. Cool. No need to do that. So we were looking at REST, and that's ES5. Perfect. So don't see that's an error. Error is the type what I mentioned, and you see cannot read property and comma product is not defined. This is how you get in JavaScript when you try to do a string plus an array concatenation, right? So this is what the output you get, okay? So this was done in ES5, okay? So how do you transform this back to ES6? That's the challenge, okay? So what I've done now is something interesting. So you've seen the first, I knew the first argument is always going to be the type, okay? The rest arguments are going to be, for me, I just look at the rest of the arguments, right? The rest of the arguments, what I see is logs, the logs of errors, right? And I just don't want all these logs to be just parameter 1, it's just going to be tedious and I don't want that. So what I've done here is, just you see the second argument, what is a REST way of doing it, it's ..logs. Right? So what it defines now is, inside your messages, var messages is an array. Okay, I've just done logs of length. Rather doing I'm skipping I is equal to 1 and doing something, I've just done args of length, which means that it has all the values what I have now inside the argument, skipping 1. So this is how you could do REST. REST means rest all the parameters what I have. Just collate it and put it at one shot. This is what you get out of REST. Okay, and this is something which is interesting and you could try this out, and this works perfectly fine. And if you want to just give it a try, so let me just go and say that's es6.js. So it's going to return the same value, right? So you have just done something which is easy and tricky, okay? Cool. So okay, the next operator is spread. So spread is nothing but opposite of this. What is opposite of rest? Okay, rest, what it does is it brings all together, whereas spread tries to spread it out. Okay, it's like spread it into comma separated values. Okay, when do you need to use it? Okay, just an example is assuming the thing someone has gone ahead and corrected errors rather being arguments. He has made errors as logs as just array of values. Right? I felt, okay, the array has to be log of values now, but no one wants to change the logger function which is already written, right? So what you could do is just go ahead and in JavaScript, this is ES5, okay, what you would end up doing is error.concat, and you're going to push all this into single array. So if you see the line here at the bottom, so error is it's an array, and concat errors. So errors is an array of values. So now you ended up having the same solution what I did in the first one, right? So you just have all the arguments which is being passed because it's being applied. So when you do an applied, it splits by comma as an array. Okay, so that is how apply works. Maybe you can just look into the code and understand how it is working. Basically go to the repository and check that out. Okay. Let us check how it is done on ES6. ES6, what you could do is all that apply thing, you could just remove that, ignore that part, and you could say that errors ... So what is this going to do is, it is going to spread all the things for you. So spread the array into comma separated values, and you're going to consume it back into logs. You got it? So I've spread it into comma separated and I've consumed it back. So this is what you get out of spread, right? It spreads the values, whereas rest is going to rest and collate and combine it together. So that is how you need to correlate and make sure these both work together well, right? So let's move on to the next thing. I think most of them, like in JavaScript, the latest version is object literals. So object literals, I'll just go to the code rather viasting time on this. Okay. So how many of you guys have done this a lot? Like, so going get region, then saying get regions, then doing get all regions, and if you have a function, you have to try to function completely. I think everyone has done this. Maybe if you have not, that is how in the ES5 you had to do it every time. If you have to repeat the name again and again. Even though the function is there, you have to repeat it multiple times. So how do you do it in ES6? Right? It's the same thing, nothing you have to do. You know the name is going to be the same. You could say get region is going to be get region. You need not specify colon and just the name again. That you could skip that, and you could do it for even the get all regions. The same thing applies. But if you see the function has become a little shortcut way of doing it, right? The sugar is that you don't have to write functions anymore. You could just say a curly. You could open your braces and just go and start writing a function. So that's the simplicity of ES6. So don't need to write function and write the keyword. It's just shortens the whole way of doing it. Okay. So now, this is interesting. Okay, so how I think template literals are something which is very impressive in JavaScript. I think ES6 has one of the coolest features now is the template literals. Okay, so how many of you guys have concatenated the strings here? Each and every time you see a variable coming in, you'll just try to concatenate, right? So each and every time you have a different variable, you'll try to concatenate, you'll put a single quote or double quote, you're just confused what you're trying to do there, right? It becomes more, your code becomes more ugly as it grows bigger and bigger, right? So what you could do in ES6 is something simple, okay? You could just go have a backtick, okay, and you could just provide your variable name as $ and the curly braces, that is lucky number, and this is going to work out of the box. So you don't have to do the concatenation of strings anymore. Right? Any questions? Cool. So the next topic is destructuring. I think this is something interesting as well. Okay. destructuring is sometimes confusing for people, but it is very powerful as well. Okay, so what it does is, okay, first let's go to an ES5 code, what you have been doing so long, and we'll go back to ES6. Okay, so in ES5, let's take an example of a calc is a function. Okay, and you have calc is going to return two nested functions, that is an object with function called add and sub. Okay, that is going to do an addition and subtraction. And what I would do is, I would say I want to just plug add out of it. What I would do now is add, I would just have to call the calc function, then I would need to plug add out of it. Right? So now what happens is, if you have two operators, right? Let's assume that you have operator plus and minus. Okay, you want to plug the first operator out of it. Okay, what you would do is, I want to plug the add operator. I would just go say that operators of 0, that's going to plug the first item out of it. Right? So what you could do now in ES6 with destructuring is something interesting. Okay, so you would have done this multiple times. You would have used it in import. If you guys are using ES6 a lot, you would have used import a lot of times, and export and import. And in import, you would have used this curly braces and referencing only one value and getting that variable out of it, right? So the same thing can be applied, right? So I could just plug out add, and add would be plugged out of calc, and I could start accessing add as a variable. Okay, that is something cool. And if you see at the bottom, now I could go ahead and actually destructure the array as well, right? If you look at add operator, what I had used now, add operator becomes the first argument of the array. So that is the first value of the array, and sub operator becomes the second, right? Now if you plug add operator out of it, its add is going to reference to plus, and sub is going to reference to minus. It's one-to-one mapping. And you could also play around, you could remove add operator, and you could have only comma and sub operator, which you could have only sub to be plugged out, right? You could use all these combinations as well. Okay, perfect. So I think scope is not a syntactic sugar, but it's helping out a lot of things. Okay, I believe most of them would be I would just go to an example of ES5 to explain this. Okay, if you look at the example here, I have a variable called global. Okay, and I have an if statement which has I'm actually having global as global. I've passed the value as global. I don't think so. You need to look at that. That's a typo. And I'm just having var global is equal to 100. Okay. And what you look at, what would be the answer now is global into pi, right? Global into pi console.log. I think this is not the answer altogether. It's global into pi is, what's the answer you're going to get is 100 into 3.4. What is the answer? Can you guys guess it? It's wrong over there. Global into pi, what would be the answer now? 31.4. So let's just try this out. Okay, 314. Okay, the answer was 314. And if you have observed, the next question is much more tricky. Okay, so if you see var, I have a for loop. Okay, where it says I is equal to 0, I increment. So I just do I less than 10 and keep incrementing the values, right? And I have a set timeout and have a console.log I. Each and every time, if you see if you are performing an asynchronous operation or anything like this, so set timeout might be an async operation what you're performing here, right? You would be expecting an answer to be 0 to 9, but you're going to get a value which is always 10. Because it's going to remember the last instance. Okay, that is when it was exited out, it was 9, and it added plus 1, that is 10. So it's going to print you 10 times, right? So if you're using var, or you're just not trying to do anything, I is equal to 0, it's going to default to var. Okay, so this is the answer what you're going to get, and this is associated, maybe people call it closure. Closure is associated with scope, and you would always get a value of 10, which is the function which remembers the last instance, right? So all this can be solved using your let and constants. Okay, so if you go look at let and constants now, you need not worry about what is global now. So it's always going to get the global value. That global value is going to be 10. Okay, so you don't have to worry if the global value has got changed in between, right? If someone has come and changed the value in between, you don't have to worry about it. It always holds true. So when the let value, what was declared and initialized here, it's going to be, the lifespan is going to be within the block scope, which you have been doing in any other language. And if you observe the for let I is equal to 0, now what it does is it remembers the last instance of I. Okay, so it would remember 0, 1, 2, 3 until 9, rather than having a value which it remembered as 10 the last time across. Right? So this is actually you might break your head thinking what has happened, but the thing is that you have actually got into an issue of closure in JavaScript, or just the function remembered the last instance of the value, which was I is equal to 10 always. Okay, so whereas this can be solved using let. Okay, so I'm not saying replace every var with let, but use a wise choice where to use let and where to use var. Right? So arrow functions, I think most of them would have seen this arrow function and would have thought what is happening and what is arrow function by the way, right? So arrow function is nothing but a shortcut syntax, and you should also be careful while using arrow function. Arrow function is easy to, you think, okay, arrow function is something jazzy, I can start using it, it's a shortcut syntax everywhere, but that's not right. It is also has a lexical binding scope, okay, which you wouldn't have done before. What you would have done in this binding is going to, the whole context of binding is going to change with your lexical binding. Okay, lexical binding refers to what the scope of the function was, it is going to bind to that function scope, no more. So I think the example would explain better. Okay, I think the slide got messed up, so let me pull out the code. Okay, let me pull this out. So if you could see the code here, okay, I think we have a function called a simple function, add and sub, okay. That's nothing doing, it's just adding and subtracting the values. But you see at the bottom, okay, have a greeting function. Okay, I think this was not the slide, that was bullshit. I think you are going to just focus on this part. Okay, we have a greeting constructor function. Okay, and if you look at the greeting constructor function, I've just initialized an object and I've given it G, the instance is G, and I've just passed John. Okay, John is the name, it refers to this dot name, and if you have a set timeout within the function, let's assume this say hello async is a set timeout within it, and if you want to reference the value of this within that, it's not going to refer. So you need to say var self is equal to this, right? This, you would have done this multiple times. You didn't know what is happening within the async function. You'd think self, this context got lost or something, but this context went to the set timeout. Now it will go to the node process itself, the global node process. Okay, so you would have done a hack, or you would have done this, the smartest way of doing it, var self is equal to this, that is equal to this, and you would put self.name and you could get the name out of it, right? This is the way everyone would have done this trick. Okay, but with arrow function it's got changed a bit. Okay, so what arrow function does is, okay, I'll just remove this piece, somehow it got into this. Okay, so if you see the say hello function, I've just changed to an arrow function here. Okay, so the arrow function now I've just say console.log hello this dot name, it works fine. Okay, but you would also see the say hello set timeout console.log this dot name works fine. Right, so previously I couldn't use this at all, but arrow function is nothing but an anonymous function, but the context of this refers to the lexical binding, right? So now this still refers to the constructor method itself, right? No more you have to worry about it's going to point to the node process or something, right? So within arrow function, this is the benefit what you get. So the binding scope is going to change, and moreover it's a shortcut syntax, right? It's much more like a shortcut syntax what you get. I think I was trying to show that, maybe I went on to delete it. Okay, I think this is what I try to show. So it's a shortcut syntax. Okay, so the first function is add and the second function is sub. Okay, I would have done this add 2,3 sub 2, sub 5,3 and it returns a value, but in ES6 it's much more simpler. I could just say add a comma b, okay, and I just have an arrow and I could say return a plus b. This is what you had done previously. It's the same thing, and you could also make it shorter, right? The sub, I've made it much more shorter because it's going to return only one value. You don't have multiple lines to execute. So if you have a single line of execution or return, you could just do this. This is the simplest way of doing it, okay? And you have to be also careful about the binding of this, because it refers to the lexical binding. No more this context refers to the parent function or something, right? Now, I think classes is being there for a long time in every language. Only JavaScript didn't include it. People felt we have to have classes, and classes is there in JavaScript now, okay? And before classes, how we used to do that, right? Yeah, prototypical inheritance, I think people were about, we used to have classes concept, but in a different way. That's called prototypical inheritance, right? Or prototype based, everything was done. Even extending an let's assume a person is a class, I want to extend it as an employee has to extend the person class. We used to do it using prototypical. Maybe I'll explain the code, how it was done, so which is much more simpler. Okay, person is a class, okay, so this, you have to just remember, person is a class, and I have say hello, I say person1, and I pass a parameter John and 25. I could just say that say hello, it is going to return that person name, okay, hello so and so John, okay. And if I have an employee, this is where it's tricky, okay. If I have an employee class, and the employee class has to extend the person class, okay. So what you would be doing now is, you would say employee.prototype is equal to new person. Okay, so now what would happen is the prototype chain would hook all the objects of the person class to it, okay. And next you have to also do is employee.prototype.constructor is equal to employee. So the constructor gets changed to the employee, okay. And you have to also, if you had to use a super function, right, something, I think classes have something cooler feature is super. You could invoke a super class or something, right. So what you have to do here is employee.prototype.parent is equal to person.prototype, and if I had to call this, it's all pretty nasty, but this dot parent say hello.call this, which is going to say that, okay, say hello, and it's going to append these things. Looks a horrible piece of code, but this is how we used to do it in JavaScript, okay. And how simple it has become is what I'm going to show you now, okay. So the same code, how it has got transformed, and behind the scene it's nothing different. They have used still the prototype concept, but they've just added a syntactic sugar, okay. The same code, let's say the person, now we have a constructor method, it's this dot name, this dot age, and say hello. And the same thing, what we had to do is now is employee extends person. That's the simplest, okay. No need to do the prototype chain or do a hook there, constructor changing, all this, no, I think makes more horrible, the code looks more horrible at that point of time, right? So you could just do the same thing, and you could invoke the super, and if you need to call what we had done there, parent, and the code, just what we done, this long piece of line, right? So let's say this dot parent dot say hello, then we have to bind the context to this. We need not do anything that, just we have to say super dot say hello, it's going to refer to the super, that is a parent class, right? That's person, and it's going to extend that, and I'm going to append that span. Okay. You want to say this, right? We could just make it run, but I think we'll just do that. The last but not the least, generators, okay. Generators are something confusing for most of the people. Why do we need generators? Is generators make sense or not? Generators are nothing but are functions that can be paused at any point of time. I think we didn't have this feature of pause at any point of time. I could pause and return, and again I can start executing the next line, right? This feature was missing in JavaScript, and that is possible using generators, okay. So let's take a simple example of, I think, let me go to this, where it's simpler to generators. Let's take a classic example of ES5, what you would have done. Let's say get payment history is the method, okay. You're just trying to get the history of payments, maybe for your Vodafone bill, or maybe for your Optus, or any bills for a certain year, okay. So what you would do now is, you would have a function called get payment history, and you would have a function, internal function or an API, which is going to say fetch history. You want to fetch the history based on an year, okay. And before this, I want to validate this. Let's say this is a user has requested but I want to validate the token of the user, right? Whether is this a valid user, can I give a payment history details to this person or not, right? Maybe if it's a banking or something, you need to validate. So in that case, what we used to do previously is we used to validate the token what we have got, okay? And then we used to return the payment history if the token was valid. Is that right? So we used to make a call for validate, and then we used to return the token history or the payment history completely to that person, right? So how this can be done using ES6 generators, right? So generator functions are like function, for generator function you have to put a star after that, okay? It's like you need to say function star, that refers to a generator function, okay? And what I've done now is I've just put the validate function inside it, okay? And if you observe here, there are a couple of statements, that is yield statements what you get, that is yield, and the yield is for next. What I do, the first thing is I do a get payment history call where I just pass the token, okay? Now what happens is it just goes ahead and calls a get payment history method, okay? And it just goes for the first yield, okay? The first yield just does the validation of the token, okay? And if you observe carefully, once the validation of the token is done, the token value what we get, right? Whether it's valid or true or false, that value goes into your next input, okay? The next input is nothing but whether it's a valid token or not, okay? Once it's a valid token, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass that value to the fetch history, okay? And along with the value what I've got, that is the token value, and this is going to make the call to fetch the complete history. That is, if you see that 2001 was passed in the next input. If it was valid, okay, if you see the line here, if the code was valid, okay, I'm going to just go and say that, okay, is valid, I iterated or next, and here is the year which is getting passed, that is 2011. The 2011 is the value what you get here. Right? So history is iterator.next year, and year is what I fetched from the value, and that goes to next input, and that gets into your fetch history method, and you get the value out. Might look confusing, but rather doing two calls, I've just done it with a single call. That is a single method which has two yields. Right? I could pause it and then I could start executing it. Right? So, and this would work multiple calls as well. Right? So let me try for multiple calls. Right? Let's assume that it's node. Let's see this piece of code works or not. Slash. Perfect, it works fine. And let me just do another call or something where I copy the same code. Okay. I just change the value to 2012. Okay, perfect. Let me just run this. I should be getting to. See, so you could make multiple calls. It's just not that it just pauses there and you don't have to do. You could just make multiple calls and this would still execute, right? So this is something which is tricky and which is, I think we could use it for multiple places. Let's assume that you have lots of token authentication. You have to go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Rather calling multiple calls, you could hook it into the system and it will yield 1, yield 2, yield 3. And when it finds it has to stop, it will stop and go out of the function, right? Rather doing all the callbacks or doing multiple hooks into the function to get it running. It's so confusing for the user, whereas it's clear with yields or generators. Perfect. And that's it. Any questions?
The log you're accepting the function there. Could you just as easily have log equals open and close square brackets as part of the array?
Like that was for the rest, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You were talking about this. Perfect. So dot logs, right?
Yeah. So could you have instead having like logs equals open and close square brackets to accept an array?
You could do that, but you could not accept an array. That would be called default to a value, right? If I say log is equal to something, this is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So that would default a value to logs, and you could not use with rest here. So that would say I'm defaulting. So that refers to function defaults now.
Yeah.
So that would be a default value if you don't pass a value to the function.
That's it. Acceptable?
Oh?
That's an acceptable way of doing it too.
You could do that, but I think you could just pass an array over there and make sure that it works.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Do you have an example of a secret, like promise-based programming with generators?
I don't have one now. but I don't have one now.
Really good question. Node 7 was released recently. Has the ECMA6 improved in that?
I think so. So if you go to Kanga X, I think the only feature I believe it's not included in, I think the proper tailgates, tail calls is which is not included in any of the things. Maybe it's included, right? So you have everything else, but proper tail calls is not done. Proper tail calls is for optimizing the calls. I think that would be really helpful in Node, but it's still not implemented by anyone.